Hello, and welcome to Saturday Service, a podcast all about faith and football with me, Graham Boozy, in association with the Life Streams churches in Southend-on-Sea in England. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Mr. Philip Mitchell. How are you, sir?
Very well indeed, Graham. Thank you.
Thanks for joining me. Would you mind just sharing a little bit about yourself initially?
Well, I guess from a sporting context, the football was my sport growing up, and I suppose a big part of my life at different points of the journey. It's been a bigger part than others. But yeah, great love for the game growing up playing. And I played in Northern Ireland here and largely during my playing career. And I've been involved in sport and lots of different guises since that as a sales rep for Umbo, a well-known British sports brand, and then coach educator and with the Irish FA, and then more recently with Sports Chaplaincy as a national director.
I always like to dig into people's interest in football and where it began initially. So I'm really interested to know, was there a particular moment that sort of sparked this interest in football for you?
I suppose it really, I was a middle of three brothers. My father was a keen sportsman. He was a particularly good golfer, but he was also a very good amateur footballer. So that was a typical British household of, young people who really, there wasn't a lot going on. And so sport kept us all busy. We tried everything, and football was, of course, the maybe the least expensive to play. We just needed a ball. We had lampposts that could be used as goalposts and jumpers and all those things. So I suppose earliest memories, I'm a Leeds United fan, so I kind of remember some of that great team which Don Revie managed in the early 70s and watching them in cup finals. And yeah, my older brother he was a Liverpool fan. So yeah, so that was, I suppose those early memories are following English football more than anything.
Would you say that's a common thing in Northern Ireland for people to have an English club that they support?
Absolutely. Almost everybody will have an English club. Not everybody will necessarily follow Irish football, although Irish football's both in the north and the south has grown enormously, and there's obviously a lot more professional teams now, so the attendances have gone up. But the following was probably higher when I was, younger days in Ireland, but everybody's got an English team. Yeah, 100%.
And what was it about Leeds that sort of attracted you to them? Was it?
I actually don't know because my dad supported Spurs, my older brother supported Liverpool, my younger brother supports Chelsea. So it was a bit of a mixed bag. My mum was, I think she just liked Emlyn Hughes, and so whoever he was playing for at the time. But yeah, I suppose Leeds were a successful team then as well. They won the league title in '74, and yeah, and I look back probably now at that Leeds team, and people from that who are maybe a bit older than me say it was probably one of the best balanced football teams ever, on the left side and the right side. They weren't everybody's cup of tea, not everybody liked them. They obviously got the various labels, but I think everybody huge respect for them.
And did you attend many Leeds games growing up? I guess it's a difficult one, but also, if not, did you watch any local football?
Yeah, well, it was more difficult in those the 70s and 80s. Getting across to anything. I remember we went on family holidays to England, so anytime we're in England, you seen like a motorway sign saying a football club, and you were going, "Oh, Dad, can we go there?" So we did go and visit some football grounds in the summer. But no, I actually only ever been to see Leeds once at Ellen Road. But yeah, in more recent times when I worked for Umbro, obviously I got to see a lot of games with the clubs who Umbro were then sponsors to.
So, in terms of your playing career, I'm interested to know where it started and what your youth career was like, because there was a moment as a young man when I truly realised that I couldn't play football to save my life. And I'm just wondering, for someone like you who's had a career in it, was there a moment where you thought, "Oh, actually, I'm quite good at this. There might be something in this."
Yeah, I'm not sure there was a defining moment. I think there was such enjoyment. I think it was great enjoyment of playing the game. And we played a lot on the street. So great friendships formed out of all of that. It's interesting, Kevin Keegan passed away recently, and it made me think, Graham, I had the privilege of meeting him with my brother at an event he did in Northern Ireland only 18 months ago. But he was, I suppose, was the iconic British footballer of our childhood, if you like. He was someone who we admired greatly, and Keegan was infectious. He had this, great enthusiasm, and he probably had a greater rub on us as players. So I guess watching football, Keegan was the iconic player, and we all wanted to somehow or other be like him. And he worked hard, and he was ambitious and wanted to do well. And I suppose some of that rubs off. So I guess I became ambitious and wanted to do well. And so when it was a school team, and then you went to local teams, I think I realised maybe when I was maybe 15 or 16, I'm thinking, all right, there's a few people who are good players who are maybe not, maybe just pushing on with their football, and I was, and then I thought, what, I want to have a crack at this and see how far I can go, So that was really it. I mean, it was a gradual thing maybe, but yeah, I was inspired by lots of the great, I suppose, English and Irish players of that generation, and read autobiographies, and so yeah.
If you don't mind indulging me a bit, because I'm a big fan of the Irish League, so to talk to a player who's prominently played in that is quite exciting for me. I know you started your youth career with Windsor Rovers, and then you moved on to Ards. So I'm just wondering how you got on with your first taste of senior football.
Yeah, well, I remember it well. I was, I guess the first game was for the senior team was the start of the season, and I remember it well. We won 3-2, and I managed to score the second goal, so it was a nice memory. My father had passed away earlier that year, so it was a little bittersweet as well. And thought of him much in those early days, and that was difficult. But yeah, I mean, some of those local boys teams were great. This was the two predominant boys teams were Windsor Rovers, who was a great, they had a connection with Linfield, who I went on to play for, because the manager was a brother of a guy who went on to manage Linfield, Trevor Anderson, who was a former Northern Ireland Manchester United player, and then Castleton Rangers, who was the other club that I played for. They were managed by George Dunlop, who was went on to be obviously one of Linfield's iconic goalkeepers. So yeah, so I suppose there was little connections to Linfield were interesting, and then I ended up going on to play for Linfield. It was great. But those boys clubs are great. And Ards, there was a man down there called Billy Nixon, who was had played for Norwich and Shrewsbury. I was a bit of an Ards legend. He was the man who brought me to Ards as a youth team player, and was in a very good Ards team that managed to win the Northern Ireland Youth Cup. And yeah, so I was kind of blessed to be around a lot of really good people in my entire career as a truth, Graham. And I look back and think, I'm not sure I entirely appreciated all of that at the time, but I was fortunate to have good people around me, which obviously helped me both by way of encouragement and instruction.
And obviously, via Dunmurry Rec, you went on to play for Linfield and won the league and the Gold Cup. And I just wondered if you could explain the emotions of winning your first, or I would call them major trophies.
Yeah, Linfield's like an institution, it certainly was then. I guess it somewhat still is. So to play there for, a club where so many people supported, and went there myself to watch them play was incredible. And the team that won the league in 1989, it was, it's a star-studded lineup, So, I mean, I was a bit part player, really, in that team. I only broke into the team towards the back end of that season. But yeah, it was players who obviously played for Northern Ireland. Martin McGackie was the centre forward who won the European Silver Boot. Martin, along with Lee Docherty, George Dunlop, had all been capped at senior level. David Jeffrey was captain of that team. Of course, he was, most well-known people around Northern Ireland football. And yeah, I mean, it was in Irish League terms, it was star-studded, and but it was coming towards the end of a generation as well. I think the manager then, Roy Coyle, who was obviously, along with David Jeffrey, one of the most successful managers jointly in Irish football history, was then manager. But it was coming towards the end of his tenure too, so it was an interesting time. But great to be there. Some terrific players I had the privilege of playing alongside, so it was great. And winning the Gold Cup, which became a trophy that was, or a tournament became, I suppose, very dear to me, because I won it with two other clubs as well, was great. And yeah, great memories of playing against Roy McCready in the final, who was an iconic player for Portadown.
And from there, you moved over to Ipswich. So I was just wondering if you could share how much of a challenge it was for you to adjust, because you would have been around 22 or something ish then.
Yeah.
And I don't know, did you find it a similar level technically, or were there things that you found very challenging as a result of being a young man?
Yeah, well, I suppose, Graham, at that time, in my life, it was when Ipswich came in for me. It wasn't a case of, I'll think about it. It was, you're 22, you're probably not going to get many other chances, beyond that. And so when they came in, I was like, I'm going. And yeah, I mean, probably when I look back, I probably needed another year under my belt, at least in Irish League football, to feel, you know, because it was probably mid-20s before I really felt it settled into my Irish League football skin. So in some ways, we went a bit early, but I wasn't one where I could really delay. So I went across. The adjustments were, I mean, you look back now, I was excited to go, but the adjustments were, you're away from home, and much as everybody knows you back in Northern Ireland, you're just another player, and you've got to go and fight for your place. You're straight in the first team squad. They had just changed managers, so everybody was, it was a dressing room. There was a lot of competition, a lot of great players in that dressing room. So, yeah, I mean, technically, I mean, everything's higher, technically, tactically, physically, psychologically, everything goes up. You're in a full-time environment, which I wasn't in. But yeah, again, it was a terrific honour to play with so many great players and great manager as well, and a great club. And I look back now, Graham, and I probably was a wee bit short of what was required. There was days I was in training and I thought, I'm miles away from this. And there was other days, truthfully, I felt I was as good as any of them. But that was the reality of the transition. And unfortunately, I wasn't there long enough to kind of see out the other end.
But possibly an experience worth having in terms of building a certain degree of resilience, I would imagine.
Well, yeah, you talk about resilience, you talk about, moments of impact in our lives. And obviously for me, aside from giving my life to Christ at 14, I mean, losing my father at 18, and then I suppose off the back of that, there was this sort of increase, this crest you were starting to ride down of everything seemed to be working out and going into place. And, you get to move to England. And then there's a disappointment of that. So, yeah, somewhere on that journey of, I guess, of losing my dad, you don't process everything, Graham, exactly, but I guess what I look back now, I was kind of going, all right, this is me now. I've got to make decisions here. I've got to fight. I remember my dad was someone who said, you got to keep going. I remember him saying that in a particular situation in our family's life. So I did. I kept going, and I suppose that's the phrase around resilience now is, you got to keep going, and perseverance. I realize now is a biblical quality as well. So yeah, it certainly built something in there, as all of life's experience does, and God was purposing things as well. So I thought it was, yeah.
So I've just come off the back of watching Larne playing Red Star Belgrade away last night at the time of recording in the Champions League qualifiers. And obviously when you joined Portadown, you did the same journey. And I just really want to hear about your experience going to Belgrade and playing, because it's a different world. And I'm just intrigued about your experience going abroad and playing.
Yeah, well, I've been away with Linfield. We played as the winners of our league in the European Cup. To a couple of years prior to that, we played the Dnipropetrovsk, who were obviously a Ukrainian team, but was then part of the Soviet Union. And then, so this was the next European experience. And I think it was the last year, if I remember, Graham, where there was an open European draw where the Balkans hadn't broken up, the Soviet Union hadn't broken up, and therefore it was 32 teams, perfect number for European competition. So, and of course, they were the, reigning champions at that time. They had Darko Panchev, who was, I think, had won the European Golden Boot. That Sinisa Mihailovic, who'd gone to star for Lazio. Robert Prosinecki had just left him to go to Real Madrid. Bela Dodic was a well-known player in that team as well. So yeah, it was. I remember hearing the news. I was on holiday in Florida to say you've drawn Red Star Belgrade, and I was saying, wow, that'll be great. And we started the season well at Portadown. We were our form was pretty good, but this was a whole different ball of wax. I remember the one player who stood out over the two games was Martin Russell, who played a lot. Martin had been in England, played for Manchester United and Leicester, had a left foot that could open a tin of beans, was tremendous. And he wouldn't have looked at a place in their team that night, that's the truth. But the game wasn't actually played in Belgrade. It was actually played on the Hungarian border in Szeged, because they had crowd trouble, as I understand it, from the semi-final the previous year, and therefore there was a penalty for that, and it was that they couldn't play at home. So instead of playing in front of 80,000 in the Stadium of Light, we played in front of 8,000 in Szeged. But it was still terrific to play against all them players, and obviously it was a packed stadium at Shamrock Park when we came back to Portadown. I think they put extra seating in, whatever. But yeah, I mean, it was let's just say Red Star Belgrade had a lot of the ball.
Yeah.
And but yeah, I think I spent most of the night trying to sit in front of the back four and stop passes getting through without much joy. But yeah, it was great to have played against them. And I mean, and I think back, when my career finished, I realised, that I'd played against the reigning European champions, and also Linfield during my time there had actually played a friendly against the reigning world champions, Argentina, which again is kind of a bit of a forgotten story, but they brought over their entire team, and nobody could believe that either. But it did happen in 1989, and everybody was there except for Maradona. So it was just nice to play against the best nation in the world at that time, and the reigning European champions.
And you moved on to Distillery, but I'm interested in football. If you spend a couple of seasons somewhere, what prompts you to potentially want to make a move and make a change? Is it like a change of management, or do you just feel this works better for me? I'm interested to know the mechanism there.
Well, first of all, obviously, going from Ards to Murray Rack to Linfield to Ipswich. The Ards to Murray Rack one was more on account of struggling a bit after my dad died, but everything else was kind of an upward move. You come back then, it's a downward move, but you're looking for the best team. Linfield seemed the obvious choice, but Portadown were the best team in the country. That's where I ended up. But yeah, I mean, listen, in everybody's playing career, there'll be times when you feel you're more or less favoured by the manager. And much as I was playing, most of the games all that season for Portadown, I was a little bit frustrated because obviously it came back and needed really for something to happen at Portadown, and we kind of were played bridesmaid most that season to Glentoran. And so Billy Hamilton, famous Northern Ireland international, was, I suppose, doing a bit of a rebuild. And I suppose there was a number of players he signed, of which I was one, who would appear their careers had taken a little bit of a downward turn over the last year or two. I was still only 23, 24 at the time. And I actually went on loan for a few games at the end of the season, and he convinced me to stay, and we had a great time there. So there's probably lots of factors. I mean, I'm still largely ambitious. I wanted to play at the highest level I could, and whilst that seemed like a downward step, it also felt, I'm going to be playing with a great manager here, and I knew some of the players he'd signed as well were players of high pedigree, and we had, of the 4 years I was there, certainly the first three were great, and we knocked on the door for the title and won that Gold Cup tournament, and I went close on one or two other ones as well. So it was a fun dressing room.
Of course, you had another European adventure, Glentoran. You won the Gold Cup again. It seems to be your favourite tournament, and the Irish Cup. But obviously, you played Maccabi Haifa in the Cup Winners' Cup as well. So I'm assuming that was another great adventure.
Yeah, that was probably my favourite out of them all. Largely because I guess maybe you're a bit. I was maybe 29, 30 then when we played Maccabi Haifa. We just won the Irish Cup. This was a team that had 9 or 10 months prior to that were struggling a bit, and Roy Coyle, of course, the head of Linfield, he was previously my manager at Linfield, had came on to take the team at Glentoran, and we went on this kind of surge. So we went in that season with a lot of confidence. And we ran them closely. We lost 1-0 in Belfast, and we were drawing one each in Haifa with 15 minutes left. If we had scored, they were out, and they scored a penalty later on. So I remember all the clamour during the game. They wanted to get this young player onto the pitch, Maccabi Haifa, and it's only years later I looked at the programme and realised it was Yossi Benayoun. But yeah, terrific experience. And at that particular time, I remember going across. It was a slightly more mature Christian now, and so it was great going to Israel. Haifa sits under Mount Carmel there, and you're thinking and reading of all the scripture and all what happened there. And it was a great time of conversation then with players, some of my teammates, and wanted to know a little bit more about what it meant to be a Christian. And Stuart Elliott, who went on, of course, to play for Northern Ireland, and Hull City and Motherwell and all those teams, whose church I now attend, was on that trip as well. He was a younger player, and so it was great. I remember that trip fondly, and of course we came back and went on to win the league. So it was it's a really strong team that I played in. I was really privileged to play with so many good players and a great manager as well.
With football being such a short-term career, I'm just wondering, when you moved into the twilight of your career, how did you navigate your way out of that and back into, I don't know what to call it, civilian life, should we say? I'm assuming faith can have a part to play in that sort of transition.
I think it's a good question. And truthfully, I wasn't really thinking about it. I think the picture in my life, God was at the centre of my life, Graham. So football wasn't the be-all and end-all. I think, I suppose, in the epitaph of Philip Mitchell, a footballer, one of the journalists at the time said, Mitch was as committed as anybody in that Glentoran dressing room, but you realise that it wasn't the be-all and end-all for him. And I quite liked that he said that. And I think hopefully my teammates would have realised that as well. So I suppose the transition, I wasn't really thinking about it. I was truthfully, when I actually decided to leave, I was probably playing as well as I'd ever played in my career. I was still fit. I'd had a knee injury, probably the worst injury I'd had, which kept me out for a few months maximum, a couple of years prior. But I was feeling good. But I'd started to work for Umbo, the sports company at that time. That was busy. Our second child was on the way, Jonah. Jamie had came a couple of years prior. My mum had just come through a liver transplant. And so there was a lot going on. And I just felt, and truthfully, the manager had an offer for me from another club, and he was getting money on the table for like a nearly 31-year-old. So, but I didn't really want to move, and I just had to look at everything and said, you know what, God's been really good to me, and been blessed by playing with so many great players and great clubs and managers, and it seemed it was less of a priority then, Graham. My identity wasn't wrapped up in being a footballer. In the transition out of that, it's difficult because you say all of that and then you realize there's, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, all those things aren't there anymore. I suppose that I was fortunate working for Umbo. I had still some contact with football and football people. I didn't really miss it. I think what I missed was I tried to keep training for a couple of weeks after I stopped playing. And then I realized, what am I training for? Because I realized actually the reason I was training was for Saturday. It was Saturday that really mattered. And Saturday wasn't there anymore. So, but it was great. It takes you a little while just to kind of, readjust. Jamie, our eldest boy, was a tremendous comfort to me because I spent Saturday afternoons with him, and we went to parks and he kicked his ball and watched amateur football and all. But yeah, there is a transition for every player, whether you're playing, professionally or amateur, because if it's been part of your life for so long, there's a routine that follows all of that. There's an outcome that you're hoping for, and you're trying to stay fit, play well, and keep winning, and all of those things. And that doesn't happen every week. So yeah, I wasn't really preparing for it, and truthfully, I probably expected to stay in the game a bit longer. I was probably lightly made up, and thought I could play for a bit longer here. But there you go, God had other plans.
And you mentioned your boy there. Two of your sons, Jonah and Jamie, seem to have played football at a pretty good level. And I'm always intrigued by families that the dad was a footballer and the two boys are a footballer. And I'm like, how does this happen? Is it a case of being introduced to football really early and time to develop? I'm intrigued as to how a whole family can be good at it.
Yeah, well, the boys would probably bounce that question better than I would. But I guess, dad was football daft to some degree. And I suppose I kind of picked up an easy model, having my father having been, a father to three boys. I was now a father to three boys. Just kind of follow the model. Lee, our youngest boy, was a really good footballer as well, and he still plays a bit of five-a-side. Jamie still plays over in England. He's just signed for a new club in England. He's been playing for a number of clubs there. He's played the last 4 years for Burnham. Jonah done really well here with Ards and Queen's University. And Lee was, I guess, golf was his sport in the end, so that's what he ended up playing. But I suppose it was more of a sporting family. I mean, the football was obviously probably what they all settle on, support different teams. But yeah, I mean, I guess I understand now more about what kids do is they copy, don't they? So there was a bit of copying and all of that. But I actually think, truthfully, the two eldest lads were better players than I was. In terms, there's things they did. They may not have been able to go and play at the higher level that I played at, but, were terrifically talented. And Lee was a scratch golfer, so he was a different level altogether than me in the bat and ball game.
So just to round that section off, just a couple of very quick fire questions. Is there a particular ground or stadium that you really enjoyed playing in? And also, can you pinpoint a little highlight of your career looking back?
Yeah, I suppose ground in Northern Ireland, you know obviously a bit about Irish football. It was, well, I suppose my favourite ground was the Oval. It was the best playing surface, and of course it was actually another reason why I signed for Glentoran, because Tommy Cassidy, again another former Northern Ireland international, who signed me for Glentoran. I remember thinking, as I was talking to him, thinking I've always enjoyed playing at the Oval, and I would like to play at the Oval every other week. As an away ground, I seemed to score a lot of goals of solitude at Cliftonville's ground, so I scored half a dozen there. So during my career, and then in England, my fondest memories were playing it. I played at Upton Park on 3 occasions. So, enjoyed those games and played well and whatever. So I suppose, West Ham's ground was the one that probably stands out for me there, Just in terms of a football moment, I mean, the Irish Cup win with Glentoran, something about an FA Cup that, an Irish Cup or Scottish Cup, whatever it might be, there's a journey to there, and we beat Linfield in the semi-final and then we done on the final. So I suppose that whole build-up, semi-final, final, my mother had gone in for liver transplant just before the semi-final, came out just before the final. So that was all part of that journey as well. And that was probably the start of a Glentoran team that went on to win a lot of trophies in the years that followed.
So just moving on, if it's okay, to your own personal journey of faith, you touched on it, that you became a Christian as a young man. Do you mind just sharing, firstly, what you think drew you to faith and the initial path that you took?
I mean, like a lot of families in Northern Ireland, we were a church-going family. My mum and dad we went to church every week. I'm going to say sometimes people describe it as a nominal faith, but I think there was something a bit deeper there as well. And I think they had both been at Billy Graham events back in, prior to us being born. So something deeper sown in their lives, which became more alive later in their lives, and when they surrendered everything to Christ. But I suppose I was intrigued. It's amazing what goes on in the mind. I sometimes say to fathers now, when their kids are in their, between them ages of maybe leaving primary school and going on to grammar school. There's a lot swirled around a young man's mind, and I was, whilst I was a bit of a messer around the church world, people probably put up with me and tolerated me more than anything. I had some questions, and a Sunday school teacher provided an opportunity for me to ask those questions, and set me off on a little journey. I was reading Bible notes, which were very helpful at that time, and reading what it meant to be a follower of Jesus, what it meant to become a Christian. And I realized that some of the qualities that I was going to need were qualities that, strangely, when I look back now, were qualities you needed to be a footballer as well. So I needed to be courageous. I needed to be committed. I needed to persevere, some level of consistency, striving for that at least anyway. So there was something about wanting to follow Jesus that was certainly not going to be easy. I was not going to be, certainly not lightweight. Felt something was, this is real, serious, brave, courageous, all those things. So, but apart from anything else, I realized I needed to see it. That was what I realized, Graham. I was in need of a savior. So I wasn't following a religion or a denomination or joining something. I was process of starting to surrender my life to Christ, and that was so I knelt in bed at 14 years of age and asked Jesus into my life, and yeah, it was the best decision I ever made. And on that journey, many years later, I had a period when I became distracted with the busy things of life, like my job primarily, and so there's also a bit of a prodigal son story to my story too, So, but yeah, that was the start of my journey of following Christ.
And as you continued on with it, I'm interested, what was like the culture around football and faith at the time you were playing? Would you say you were a little bit alone in the dressing room, or, what was the reaction to you being outwardly Christian?
I think in those early days, and certainly the boyhood clubs, you were probably more identified as being a Christian by things you didn't do rather than things you did. That was kind of just the Northern Ireland culture. In the football world, then, as I moved into playing the Irish League, I mean, people knew you were a Christian, and I think that there was great respect for Christianity around football. I was very fortunate as well that people who were maybe, close to 10 years older than me, like Terry Moore, who was in Glentoran, Canadian International, Johnny Jamieson, who was Northern Ireland International, they were the forerunners. What I remember, Graham, is I remember going to a Christians and Sport event held in Avenue Leisure Centre by a wonderful man called Lawrence Walker, who went to glory too early, but went in God's time. And he had an evening where all of these players came along and were interviewed on a panel. And I don't know who all was invited, but I was there. And they had all made their mark. I was 18. I hadn't made my mark really. And I realised from listening to all of them, Stephen Baxter might have been there as well. You could be a footballer and you could be a Christian. And there wasn't anything there to be anything other than a privilege to do both of those things. So that was great encouragement to me. I've talked about the privilege I've had, Graham, here, of the players that have played with, managers have played for. God was using them people, and I know them guys well. He was using those guys to inspire and encourage me to push on with whatever he had for me. So that was a blessing.
I'm going to throw some quotes at you throughout this, but in the Belfast Telegraph, you said, "As I reflect on the journey of my life, what is most important to me now is my friendship and relationship with God." And I know that's quite a simple sentence, but I found it quite poignant, actually, that you're able to reflect back and see that was and is the most important thing in your life.
Yeah, well, I talked about the time whenever I left Glentoran, the picture was big enough in my life for me not to be nervous about stepping into football. It was maybe unexpected in the sense that how I was playing, how the team was playing, didn't seem to sort of fit in with all of that. But I think that's how God works. God just sometimes takes people out of an environment and takes them somewhere else. We know about that in the Bible. Philip was taken out, out of an environment where he seemed to be a thriving evangelical environment to go and deal with some Ethiopian eunuch. So that's how God works, and took me out of it. And people say to me now, Graham, do you still love football? And I say, well, not so much. I love the people involved in football much more. I think I always did, but I love them more, love the game less. It's not that I don't love the game, but it's a game. The people who are involved in sport are of much more interest to me, and I care about them, their souls. That's far more important. So I think that's been the privilege. I think that's what's changed in my heart over the years. And when I said that quote, I think I just turned 50, and you kind of realize, I suppose, all right, I'm in the second half here now, to put it in football parlance. So that is the most important thing for me. And I want whatever days I have left on earth to count for Christ and his purposes.
And if you feel comfortable, you're able to share a little bit of testimony regarding when your faith has sort of carried you through a potentially challenging circumstance, or indeed a positive experience. I just wondered if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, well, obviously the most difficult times were losing my parents. My mum died 6 months maybe after I'd retired. So certainly that was a time when, you were completely, fully reliant on God. I could tell you a million circumstances after that, family and work related. And that's a great thing now. God uses all of those things, Graham. That so now, in any moment of, hmm, okay, what's the first thing to do here? Pray. A younger, less wise man, I'm not saying I'm entirely wise, but might have said, I'll fix this. A young Philip Mitchell would have said, I'll sort this out. Whereas now you're saying, God, I need you here to take control of this situation. I need you to help me, even if I think I might be able to sort it out myself. And so I'm learning to trust him with more things and understand my part and understand also God's part, his providence. To understand a lot more now about the sovereignty of God and also that providence sits with that, and providence needs to sit with that because sovereignty is about what God can do whatever he wants whenever he wants, but the providence of God is that there's a fatherly design behind it all. And I'm learning about that. We read of Joseph and all of his story and so many of the great characters in the Bible, and they must have been saying, God, what are you doing? God knew exactly what he was doing. And, you think even about Peter and John, whenever they'd been brought before the ruling council in Acts, and they courageously spoke about their faith, and people realized they'd been with Jesus. But they went on to say, there was a time whenever, the Jews, the Gentiles, the Herod and Pontius Pilate, all these people were gathered to carry out the plans of God, and what was it? It was the greatest murder in history. Now it was part of God's plan. But so I've tried to understand more about the difficulties in life that can come, and at the same time recognizing that God's hand is at work and he doesn't let us go. So I'm learning more to trust him with everything. The trials, there's that great song, as well with my soul, though Satan may buffet, though trials may come, let this blessed assurance control that Christ has regarded my helpless estate and has shed his own blood for my soul. Those are precious words to me from that song. It keeps us humble and helps us to realize that who we are and who he is.
And just to sort of move into your work with sports chaplaincy, I was wondering your thoughts on football as a tool of ministry. I obviously got linked up with you through David Jardine from the Willerfield Church, and you had organised a service there with sports chaplaincy, which we'll obviously get into more detail about in a minute. But I'm just wondering, how important do you think it is as a tool for ministry?
I think so many organisations, both local church to more extensive organisations like Ambassadors Football, Christians in Sport, Athletes in Action, Sports Chaplaincy, have all recognised that there are a lot of people who are involved in sport. And I know Sports Chaplaincy would have talked about the statistics of how many people go to church and how many people play sport. And I think the people who play sport is like about 6 or 7 times more, maybe even more than that, than who attend local church. So it's a community that we can't afford to ignore. But it's engaging because for a believer, then whether it's my son's setting up a football camp next month, so he's using that as a tool to bring people along, but then we'll bring people along to share about what really matters in their life. So it's a wonderful place to engage with people. And I think of the bowlers in God now who are on Instagram, and work they've done is just incredible. They've connected with so many Christian footballers globally. We've seen it at the World Cup. Any Christian athlete now, that's been really helpful, I think, for anybody doing any Christian work now in a sporting environment, because there's so many testimonies. Katie Taylor was wonderful for us here. Was obviously the most probably celebrated female Irish athlete on her island, who's so out there with her faith. I heard an interview recently, Carl Froch and Barry Hearn talking about, it was incredible, or Eddie Hearn, talking about Katie Taylor and faith, and it was wonderful. So all of those things have helped. Sports Chaplaincy are serving this week at the Super Cup Northern Ireland. We've had the privilege of serving at European Championships for UF Under-19 Championships, boys and girls, and Mixed Ability Rugby World Cup in Cork, and all of those things. So, and the doors are slightly more ajar on account of that so many professional Christian athletes have nailed their colours to the mast. So, and I think that the football authorities and the sporting authorities recognise that. I think there's also greater recognition that we are physical, intellectual, emotional, relational and spiritual. And taking one of those off the table is not helpful in the business of helping a sports person to see a bigger picture for life. So I think that's not just something that's recognised by us as Christians, it's recognised by the national governing bodies within sport and players and coaches and athletes alike. So there's a place for us to go and serve and love people and care for people. So it's great, and I would encourage anybody who has the opportunity to do that, that they should.
And speaking of serving, how did you come to become National Director for Sports Chaplaincy Ireland, and what were your initial ambitions when you joined the organisation?
Well, originally, Ozzie McCauley was the guy who really pioneered the work with some other wonderful men like Bill Lavery at Linfield and Andrew Thompson at Ulster Rugby were among the pioneers of the ground. But Ozzie had sort of pulled the work together in Northern Ireland. Stephen Baxter was also involved as a very part-time national director, I suppose, in inverted commas, back in the day. So actually, the baton was really passed on from Ozzie to my younger brother, Mitch, from Crown Jesus Ministry, Keith. And he said to me, look, why don't you come? And I know some people in churches who might want to get involved. You'll know some people in the sports world. And so that's what we did. And we kind of said, okay, well, we can give a little bit of time to this. But I think what struck me is, the doors were opening and people were saying, yeah, we would like that. We would like a chaplain. Yeah, I mean, it just grew from there. I mean, my ambitions were, I didn't really have any ambitions. I think what stayed with me the whole journey was, I'm out of my depth here. I really need God's help. And I was really grateful to people like Andrew and Bill and Ozzie were a great encouragement to me in them early days because they had done the work. I was fortunate to have my young brother alongside me in them days as well because he knew a little bit more about the people who might be a good fit for it. Ken White had served tremendously well, Crusaders, Dario O'Leary at Cliftonville, David Thompson at Glentoran. They were among a number of other people who'd been at it a long time. So, but in my mind at the time, I was saying, Lord, help me never to become an obstacle to anybody coming to Christ. What was also really important to me, help me never to dilute your word. Help me to make sure I stay on message here, that what your word says is true, and that I can point people to you and your word. And therefore, when people had questions, I could say, well, according to the scriptures. So that stayed with me my whole time. I think the truth is because I knew I was out of my depth, I never really felt I was leading it. That may have looked the case to other people because I had connections in sport and God used all of that for me to knock the door and say, hey, would you like a chaplain? And yeah, that'd be great. And because I had a sporting connection, they had a conversation. And then, of course, the appointments became somewhat easier. But I think I stayed in the passenger seat and God stayed in the driving seat. That was kind of the deal we had. So I was always going back to the well. But God blessed the ministry enormously when I was there. Not through anything I did, Graham, truthfully. I guess God's wants our availability, and He had my availability, and He's used it in some small way to further His purpose as well. And I'm the one that's blessed.
What did your sort of day-to-day look like? And how many chaplains were there when you first started? Because I was amazed when I saw on the Irish League FA website that every club has a chaplain seemingly, and I was wondering, was that part of your job basically?
Yes, I mean, football was probably a natural place to start. I mean, the interesting thing about Ulster Rugby was, I mean, Andrew Thompson's done a great job there, but there really wasn't any other rugby chaplains per se at that time, and one or two had been involved in cricket. I mean, it might have been one or two people who were doing sports chaplaincy, but weren't kind of aware that there was a ministry that was there to support them. But there was really, I mean, the list that Ozzie gave me, there was maybe about 20 on it. There were some people who'd done some really robust work over a period of time. So, but yeah, I mean, I guess one of the things that God used was having been involved in sport, going into any sport environment to knock at the door of a club and say, hey, I'm Philip, I'm involved with Sports Chaplaincy and love to chat to you about that. People were open to that idea. For some people, that can be quite daunting, I don't know this guy, Graham Boozy. I mean, he's the chairman. He might throw me out. But I was going, I'll at least have a football conversation with you. So I guess God used some of that gifting that He had given me around just new circumstances, new people, both in terms of meeting a club for the first time and then maybe meeting a potential chaplain for the first time. So this was all very part-time in the early days, but you realise there was lots of doors opening. We were getting appointments and it was starting to grow and we were getting into more sports. Ken Reevey came on board, who was the chaplain of the European Golf Tour. And he's done phenomenal work in terms of not just with our chaplains at some of the golf clubs, but also we've had golf events that he would have overseen. And then we were able to bring people along who are not yet believers to hear a gospel message as well. So lots of good people joined the journey. Liam McGrath was a significant person who came on board in the south of Ireland He became the first chaplain to a club in the Republic of Ireland, Drogheda United. And then again, Liam was well placed with his skill set to help develop chaplaincy alongside myself with all of the other League of Ireland clubs. And so what didn't exist in the League of Ireland then all of a sudden became like the norm down there as well. So, but yeah, and I'm saying about Ulster Rugby, there's now like, I'm sure there's maybe 30 clubs in Ulster all have a chaplain. So yeah, it was great to be part of it all. It was exciting with tremendous support from funders, tremendous support from partners. We partnered really well with some great other ministries. I must say this, more important than anything, I mean, some of the people who took on the roles as chaplains are just phenomenal, just were, and it was a privilege just to be able to serve alongside them and be part of their journey too.
How much would you say the role of the chaplain is pastoral? Would you say it's predominantly pastoral with a bit of spirituality thrown in there if it's the right moment?
No, I think all of our chaplains, they're carriers of the presence of God. So you're a Christian wherever you go, workplace, home, wherever. And as Paul said, I've become all things to all men in order that some might be saved. Jesus was the master of it, wasn't he? He wasn't conformed to any one particular type of evangelism. He met people where they were at, but he was always pointing to him, he's pointing to his Father. So I think in our way of being, in how we are, and taking our time to listen to people, meet them where they're at, first and foremost, there's no barrier for you. Once you're appointed as chaplain, they know you're a Christian. You don't have to introduce somebody and say, by the way, I'm a Christian. They know you're a Christian. And they realize that your conversation isn't all about the sport, because there's a confidentiality aspect of it. Also, you're a good listener. Willie Grattan, who's our chaplain to a lot of the junior international teams, said a really good thing. He said, people are always talking to athletes, managers, coaches, agents, physio, all of these people. He says, whenever they're with us, it's their chance to talk, not our time to listen. So I thought that was really helpful. And so people will talk. Somebody said to me a long time ago, 5 or 6 years, says, sports people aren't interested in God. And I said, that's not true. I said, actually, sports people are actually probably more interested in God than a lot of other people, because they don't want their life to be wrapped up in a performance or a result. And they know there's something more than that. And they are people who are aspiring to do well in life as well. And there's a lot of sports people are searching in their souls much deeper than those maybe perhaps who don't play sport, who are, maybe being unkind in that. But that's my experience. And therefore, so there's great opportunity. And what you find is a lot of times, whenever you're having those one-to-ones or even with a group, people will bring God up into the conversation, what they understand by faith or not faith. But I talk about Jesus, because that's who we have to talk about, That's who will, Jesus said, I am a way, the truth, and the life. So in the early days, you kind of put up with conversations around faith and spirituality a wee bit, and I think Sports Chaplaincy Ireland have done that really well to make sure people know, listen, we love you, we care about you, and by the way, we love Jesus, and by the way, he loves you as well. So being able to do that in a very natural way, as opposed to any sort of an awkward way, has been hopefully something that's been a hallmark of our chaplaincy as well. This salvation has led to great conversations and point people to Christ.
I'm just wondering how you, as the organisation, respond to different events. So, for example, there was this 12-month period in the Irish League where it seemed a lot of people were lost, and you spoke in the Telegraph about how important it was to look after the players' mental health. And I just wondered, how did you, as an organisation, respond to that difficult period?
Yeah, I mean, the loss of life, and particularly obviously too many people obviously around suicide, was grieved us so badly. And for some of the guys who were chaplains at the clubs where that was happening, you're talking about stalwarts of chaplaincy and people who are embedded in their clubs, and they hurt from that. But they were also the people who God had placed to pick the club up, and they'd done that tremendously well. So I think one of the beauties about the Sports Chaplaincy family across UK and Ireland, and obviously particularly in Ireland at that time, was how many other chaplains rallied around. And it became, I don't want to say an opportunity, maybe an opportunity, but whenever something like that happened, a lot of the chaplains, almost all of them, would have addressed their own clubs to say, look, we know this is in the news, please. David Burke, who took Michael Newbury's funeral a Cliftonville chaplain in England. David was asked to go across to take the chaplain. He said, "I want to scream from the rooftops to young people, you're valuable to God." And that was, I suppose, a message that was conveyed similarly by a lot of our chaplains to say, you matter. You matter to God. So great sadness, great difficulty for managers who lost staff members and players who were in service. I think that's one of the things that probably never happened before. We'd heard of people maybe taking their lives later in life, but I mean, Jerry Thompson was the first one at Carrick Rangers, and I remember Stephen Smith, the then chaplain at Carrick Rangers, how he was really thrust into you need to lead this. And by God's strength and grace and help, Stephen did. And Andrew Thompson, in a different set of circumstances, also rugby with Nevin Spence. So out of these incredibly sad moments in families' lives and players' lives and clubs' lives, chaplains have been asked to step forward. And then God uses all of that, He doesn't waste any of it. And I suppose sport struggles dealing with death and those types of things, and very often that's when they do look to chaplains. But I think then that allows the chaplain's role to become more rounded as well, that actually he's there for before those things happen. You can talk to him about anything and everything. And I think that's one of the things we try to say. Listen, when you go to talk to chaplain, you can talk about anything. Everything's on the table. He's not there trying to have a particular conversation with you. He wants to listen to you first.
And, I'm often quite shocked by the treatment of high-level athletes. It really does seem like people think they don't have this normal soul and can't be hurt by a criticism or something going on in their private lives. So I just wondered if you could sort of testify as to how important sports chaplains are when it comes to the athletes being under fire, should we say, for various reasons.
Well, yeah, I think they're a really important outlet, and I think they've been used more and more over the years. I think a lot of our referees, we had a great chaplain, the referees, and there's another guy who's taking on that role, Billy Dixon, our senior referees, and Billy's also involved, I think, with the Ulster rugby referees as well. But the criticism they come under is ridiculous. It's almost like anybody and everybody can have a go at the referee because we don't support him, we support our club. But of course, players and managers feel it too. I mean, I could talk about managers and the pressure and stress that they've come under. And a lot of it is, you see, when I was playing, Graham, there wasn't social media. There was a media, and the media, the journalistic media and the broadcasting media were generally very kind to all of us, They tend to report the facts on the game, But social media has become, of course, very difficult. And it's not just in sport, it's in all walks of life. But I remember a manager saying to me, when he's done his debrief after a game, he says the players are grabbing their phone. What did they say about me, Another chaplain said to me, whenever he would have seen a player even 7 or 8 years ago and seen they were a little down, he'd say, "What's happening at home? Everything okay at home? Or what's happening at work?" He says, "Now he's almost certainly saying, what are they saying about you?" So that's become really difficult. I don't know how best to convey this. I say this sometimes to Christians as well, Graham, because Christians who have a passing interest in sport can stand on a platform and proclaim Christ and then sit down and say, "Did you see that Liverpool defence?" And I go, those are people. Those people are real people with real souls. And the sporting world, I think people don't realise how much people give and how difficult it is to play sport at a high level and amateur level as well. I mean, it's people with big commitments at amateur level too. And we serve a lot of people in the amateur sport too. So people are not immune to life's ever-changing events as well. You got to remember those same sports people, their parents die, their children get sick, they lose their job. People sometimes forget that these are people live in this, cocoon, that they don't have any of that and they play well every week. And if you don't play well every week, well, then you're the worst in the world. And it's just complete nonsense,
Just to round that off, and I suspect you're going to be quite modest about this, but when you look back at your time with the organisation, do you have a particular proud moment?
I wouldn't say proud. I would say grateful, blessed to have been part of it. So many clubs and appointments and work at tournaments. We served at the Open Championship last year. Royal Portrush as well was another great event. But I think overall, what really I was saying, I used to drive home and I say, "Wow, God, this is amazing," was all the champions that we appointed in the clubs in the League of Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland. That was amazing because that was from scratch. And our funders were tremendously supportive of what we were doing down there. And so Liam became a dear friend, still is a dear friend and all this. So I think the work we did down there was wonderful because it was so groundbreaking. And then it became something where Mark Scanlon at the League of Ireland really embraced and came and spoke at our conferences. Mark became a great advocate of it. And yeah, so probably that, when I look back, I missed my Friday nights driving home from a League of Ireland game and having been around so many great people and so many tremendous chaplains serving all the way from Cork right up to Cork City to Finn Harps and right round the whole of Ireland. It was tremendous.
Beautifully put. Philip, you've managed to survive an hour in my company, which is is no mean feat, let me tell you. So your reward, as everyone gets, is the any other business section. Basically, is there anything else you would like to add? It's, the floor is yours.
Not particularly, Graham. I mean, I think hopefully, what quiz you've asked me, if somehow covered anything I might have to say, which might be meaningful. But yeah, I mean, I think whoever's listening, if you're a believer and you're interested in all of this, do pray for our Christian sports people who are playing and managing and have various staff roles within clubs. They need your prayers. Do support them. Pray that they will be a living witness and testimony within their clubs. Pray for our chaplains who serve that, who are also part of that wider staff. And if you're not yet a believer and maybe you just love sport and you're going to listen to Saturday service because you think, oh, this will be about football, which obviously a good part of it has, but that you'll realize that actually sport will never satisfy, and that Christ loves you. And the bigger part of your life is ahead. We're only here for a cup of tea, really. And, you're in need of a savior and he's done it all. And there's, as I said earlier in that song, my identity could be best described now as yours can be, as in Christ, in this sense that he has regarded my helpless estate and shed his own blood for my soul. And if you can trust in him, then we're going to a place I believe that will be just incredible. And I'm looking forward to going home someday.
Big amen to that. If you wish to find out more about the work of Sports Chaplaincy, you can head to sportschaplaincy.org.uk, or you can find them also on Instagram, both Sports Chaplaincy Ireland and Sports Chaplaincy UK. Please do head to @Saturday Service Football to find out more about this podcast on Facebook and Instagram, or @Faith and Footy on X, and head to livestreams.org.uk to find out all about my own lovely church. Mr. Philip Mitchell, thank you so much for your time. It's been brilliant.
Thanks, Graham. Thanks for the privilege of chatting to you.
No, much appreciated.